We got one more guest, one more segment here on this February 13th edition of the show. That is with John Ryan at John Ryan Sports and the number 1 on Twitter, contributor to BangTheBook.com. John, how's it going today, man?
I'm doing well, Adam. How about yourself?
Doing very well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always here, sir. Thank you so much for joining me. And we'll start in the NBA here today, I guess. We got 2 games tonight, Clippers, Boston, Oklahoma City, and New Orleans. And then it's the AllStar break. So anything on your mind for tonight's 2 games that you want to touch on here today?
It'll be interesting to see how the Clippers respond to the game they played in Philly. And, in past shows that I've done with you, everyone knows that I've been bullish on the Sixers. And that actually was a 10-star play for the clients, which made it even better. But watching that game, that was a very physical game. And it had a playoff feel to it. It almost had like a Game 7 feel to it. The Sixers came away with a huge win. They finally got Embiid to learn what the difference was between the three-point line and the paint. And they really played their best game of the year by far. So the Clippers have had a day off here to recoup from that, and now they're in Boston. And, Boston's not going to be an easy game for the Clippers to win either. So I wouldn't be surprised here if the Clippers kind of limp into the All-Star break with another loss tonight.
And that's always such an interesting thing, too. We talk about scheduling spots, we talk about situational spots, all the different things, letdowns, look-aheads, so on and so forth. But that's something that I think doesn't maybe get enough run out there, is that when you play a tough, physical game, it can be very hard to bounce back in that second one. And the Clippers definitely in that spot here. And especially, too, you get some of these games where I think sometimes these mean more to one team than another. And I think this is a situation where maybe this game means more to Boston just because the Clippers know they've got Kawhi Leonard. They know they're going to be there in that Western Conference picture. But for a team like Boston here, maybe there's just a little bit more incentive to go into the All-Star break with a win over a really good team in a potential NBA Finals playoff preview, something like that. There's also those types of things here too.
Yeah, I agree with that, Adam. Boston's coming off a loss at the Rockets in a game they didn't play all that well. They shot 43.5% from the field. But Boston's defense is another one sort of like the Sixers, but I have the Sixers as one of the top 3 defenses in the NBA. But over the last several games, there's several of them that Boston held opponents to under 40% shooting. And that's rather remarkable. And I think they match up well against the Clippers. And as long as you keep Leonard under wraps and don't let him go off for 40, you have a chance to beat them. So they've had a day of rest, too, coming back from Houston. And I just think that Boston will shoot better from the field, and they'll have the better assist-to-turnover ratio than the Clippers. And if they combine those two, their percentages of winning against the spread are very high.
Well, and I think it's always so interesting, too, especially the last game before the All-Star break, because you sort of wonder, what the mindset is of these teams. And one thing I do have a little bit of a concern about is that Boston hasn't had consecutive days off since basically the first of the year. So you do wonder if maybe they look ahead a little bit to some downtime. But, of course, you've got players going to the All-Star game. You've got guys maybe don't want to go home. Maybe they've got situations where there's just not much going on, or they'd rather be out with the boys. It's always interesting that last game right before the break to try and ascertain what a team's mentality is. I think it's really illustrative in this second game here between the Thunder and the Pelicans, because the Pelicans are making that push now. They get Zion Williamson. They've won 3 in a row. They're trying to make up for lost time and get back into that playoff hunt. Whereas for Oklahoma City, they know they're going to make the playoffs. They have lost a couple in a row. Certainly they don't want to go into the break on a 3-game losing streak, but they're going to make the playoffs. They're going to be a 6 or 7 seed in all likelihood. New Orleans is a little bit more of a desperate team tonight, and maybe we're kind of seeing that with this line move up a little bit.
Yeah, that's I agree with that, Adam. There's no question the bigger money is on the Pelicans at this point in time, and we're talking at about noon. So I wouldn't be surprised if this line did go to 2.5. The Oklahoma City Thunder are a pretty dangerous team, though. And I agree 100% with your point on Zion Williamson. He's the X factor for sure in this game. But OKC being on the road and only 2.5 kind of makes me want to lean on Oklahoma City. I would have thought this morning I would have seen the Pelicans at 3.5, possibly 4, given what you said. So the sentiment, the price tag here is making me shake my head a little bit and wonder, like, why isn't the Pelicans favored by 4? And we're only talking about 1 or 2 points, but as you know, home court is worth whatever, 2.5, 3, 3.5. Some courts are worth 4 in the NBA. So they're basically saying that Oklahoma City and the Pelicans are even teams, but you would think that the Pelicans are a better team with Zion Williamson on the court than they were before, and they should be priced a little bit higher. So, it's that contrarian part of my thinking that I'm caught up with on this game and makes me want to lean on Oklahoma City a little bit.
So 26 teams already enjoying the start of the All-Star break here because we've only got these 2 games tonight. So, John, what do you do during the NBA All-Star break as far as NBA goes? I mean, are you tweaking your numbers? Are you kind of, maybe looking for some things you want to do outside of the break, or do you just kind of set it aside and, maybe either take a break or focus on something else?
Well, regarding the numbers and the data, I will quickly, I just have a quick algorithm I run to identify the top 5 ATS wins I've had and the worst 5, just to isolate them out so that I can look at them and figure out, well, why was that play so good? Why was that play so bad? And then at the end of the season, that combines with the second half, and then I can do the tweaks then. But mainly, I look at the Major League Baseball totals, the win totals. And your passion for baseball is second to none. So I'm sure you're looking at them too. But I was thinking that I was hoping there's going to be a line for Houston missing the playoffs. And I think I'd be all over that. Tongue in cheek here, of course. But the news from them is just dreadful. And I don't know how they're going to be penalized for all of this. But maybe being banned from the playoffs is one of the options. So who knows?
Yeah, that's something I talked about in my previous segment is, initially my thoughts with Houston were, I probably want to buy this team because I think that there's going to be, that us against the world mentality. They're going to kind of band together a little bit. But the more this thing drags on, the more I think the finger pointing's kind of starting a little bit. They're trying their best from a PR standpoint to blame this on everybody else. They're blaming it on Lou now. They're blaming it on Hinch. They're blaming it on Cora and Beltran. All the guys that are no longer with the organization. There hasn't been a whole heck of a lot of personal accountability here. And I just sort of wonder what that dynamic is sort of doing to this team. And furthermore, we know that they're going to get everybody's best shot now over the course of the regular season. And, some guys are going to throw at them. There could be suspensions. There could be players that get hurt from pitchers kind of taking things into their own hands. And also, too, like I mentioned in the previous segment, the more this drags on, the more that the Astros and the organization bring attention to this, and the more that people kind of go after Rob Manfred for what I think was a pretty weak stance on everything that happened, supplemental discipline is a possibility. The more that this keeps going, as people kind of question, does Manfred kind of have a handle on this league? So I don't really know what I want to do here with Houston, but the more this drags on, the more you see quotes from players around the league, and the more you see other teams kind of taking a stance at this, the more I think it hurts Houston overall.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I'll quickly say the Wall Street Journal, I believe it was yesterday, had a great article about how this permeated the whole organization. It's not like in the steroid days where it was players identified as cheating. It wasn't the whole entire roster, at least not that we know of. This, I think everybody that worked for the Astros must have known, because it started with an Excel spreadsheet done by an intern that turned into a PowerPoint presentation that was taken to the GM, and he acted on it. So when I read that, I was like, oh my God, I mean, what the heck are these guys doing? And then the owner came out today and said that in no way, shape, or form did the cheating impact the 2017 World Series championship. So you were saying about they're trying to posture themselves, say the politically correct things. That's not politically correct, at least from the way I read it. And the accountability, I kind of said tongue in cheek too, since Excel and PowerPoint are made by Microsoft. Maybe they're the blame for all this cheating happening, because maybe the spreadsheet wouldn't have been done if Excel didn't exist. But I'm just kidding, of course. But it just blows my mind.
It really does, and that's the thing here. Not to hijack this segment completely from talking about basketball, but that's the thing. I mean, you get the AllStar break now, and in the past, it would have been something like, oh, cool. I get a little bit of a break here. It's just one less thing I have to worry about. But now with this 365-day-a-year sports betting calendar, you don't get a break. You transition your time from the NBA to Major League Baseball, or I'm sure some people may start to look at some college football stuff or something like that, or just focus more on college basketball, as we're going to do here on the next part of this segment. But that's just it, man. There's no downtime. There's always a different market to study.
Yeah, I agree. It just reminds me of my Wall Street days, where you can take the afternoon off on a Saturday after you get all the plays out, and I really don't watch too many games. I watch the condensed versions of them, but I take that time then to kind of balance myself. But you're right. I mean, every single day, 7 days a week, doesn't matter if it's Sunday. If you choose to say, well, I'm not going to work on Sunday, you're pretty much not going to be as good as you could have been in the world of betting. Because betting to me is like trading. If I short the S&P 500 today, it's the same thing as betting on the Clippers tonight. And that's I kind of like it this way, though, that you don't get the break, because you don't really you go on a vacation traditionally, and then you have to almost have a vacation from the vacation to get back into your corporate world. So that part of the vacation land I don't miss.
It's tough because, I mean, the hardest part about all of this for me, and obviously I've been grinding in this business for a long time, in terms of content creation, and a lot of the guests I have on the show have been grinding in terms of, handicapping and putting out selections for much longer than I've been in the business. But it's one of those things where, I would love to take a day off. I would love to just isolate myself from anything sports related for a 24-hour period. But you've got, it's basically FOMO. It's fear of missing out on something that, maybe costs you a bet down the line. It's like you almost always have to be vigilant. And I think it's so tough to try and find that balance of, healthily following all this stuff, but also taking some time for yourself. And, with something like the NBA All-Star Break, like I said, now it's just, well, do I do more college basketball because, there's a lot of games and conference tournaments are coming up and March Madness is coming? Do I focus on baseball because, well, that's the next thing that comes up? You got to try to find some kind of healthy balance here. And I think with so much going on, maybe the NBA All-Star Break's not the time to do it. Maybe you try to do it over the summer, but something for our listeners out there to really understand. And, if you're somebody who wants to, if you have aspirations to be in this business full time, you got to try and find that healthy balance. You got to try and find something that allows you to have a life outside of sports betting while still trying to keep up on everything that you possibly can. And, hey, if taking a break here this weekend because it's the NBA All-Star Break is your time, by all means, go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I agree. The balance is very key, because you'll burn out. That's an absolute fact that if you don't take time for yourself, and like, for example, in my life, I do 2 hikes a day with my Red Fox Lab Manny, and you don't realize how valuable that is, because then I come back from that and I'm completely refreshed mentally, and I'm able to get back at it. So it's stuff like that too that's not related to sports, and you just kind of go do something that is good for you. You going to a bar and having 6 pints of beer is not getting away from your work. Although that's fun to do too.
My age now, at this time, 6 pints of beer is work for me. It never used to be, but I'm definitely getting to that point here where it's not just work for that day; it's kind of work for the next day too. But in any event, we transition over to the college basketball side of things here, as of course, that's a sports market that doesn't really stop once the season actually gets going, except for right around the holidays. We do have one game in the Big Ten tonight that I want to pick your brain about a little bit. Iowa and Indiana. Indiana, a 2-point home favorite here in this one. As we know, the Big Ten's been a very home road dichotomy type of conference here this season. What do you think about this one tonight, John?
Well, looking at the summaries for this game, these teams are almost identical. Iowa is the one of the best offenses in the country and one of the best in the Big Ten. They play a weaker form of defense, but that kind of is minimized when you look at statistics based on every 100 possessions, which kind of minimizes the teams that like to play fast versus the methodical teams that like to play through the mud. So Indiana does have a much better defense, but Iowa has Garza, and that offense feeds through him. There's no debating that. I do have a lean on Iowa in this game for tonight. That will be actually an official call. It would be a 7-star play on Iowa. And I give out 5-star, 7-star, and 10-star. There's nothing real fancy about that, but 7-star is your normal size bet. 10-star is recommended 35% higher than a 7, and 5-star is 35% lower, and you should never bet more than 7% of your bankroll. And those are the rules. At least the rules that I think are pretty good, that are supporting a disciplined way of doing this. But anyway, Iowa, they're 17-7. Indiana's 15-8. These are two teams that I think will be in the tournament, and the Big Ten could have as many as 10. It's by far the best tournament in the country, bar none.
So as we look at Indiana here, they've lost 4 straight games. The first one to Maryland, they lost by a point at home, 15-point loss to Penn State, not super competitive against Ohio State in that road loss in Columbus on Saturday, and then lost by 12 at home to Purdue on Saturday. So you've got an Indiana team here that, trending in the wrong direction. You've got an Iowa team outside of that blowout loss to Purdue about a little over a week ago. They've been pretty good, pretty consistent. I think that's the thing you kind of look for right now in the Big Ten is, you've got teams that have a lot of losses in conference play because this conference, as you mentioned, is very, very good. But you try to find the teams that are consistently good where maybe their losses are okay. Indiana's just not that team right now.
That's right. That's a great point. I can remember earlier in my career where I would look for winning record teams that have lost to the spread 3 or more times consecutively, thinking that I'm picking the team that's going to revert back to the mean. And I was dreadfully wrong. Not all the time, but when you start realizing that method is only hitting like 45%, you kind of throw it in the trash. But you're right that Indiana's lost all 4 of those games to the spread, and some of them by a decent amount. They scored 49 at Penn State, and we all know I've been on Penn State for I feel like the whole season. And then they played better against Ohio State, but also failed on the road as 7.5-point dogs, and then the offense again 62 points at home, playing Purdue. And that was when Bobby Knight came back for the first time in 20 years. So I would have thought that Indiana would have really played well in that matchup, just with that event going on. But they didn't. So that's a team that you definitely don't look at and say, oh boy, I'm bottom picking now. I got a good buy here. And you just don't do it. I'd rather lose money on Iowa, especially with their offense and the way they're playing, versus trying to pick a bottom with Indiana and try to look smart. I mean, that's just a waste of time and a waste of money.
So as we look at this week, sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. I was just going to say, but on any given night, Indiana could win this game. I have my models, I have my projections, and as I've talked to you, I put out what I think is going to happen, but there's no guarantee what I think is going to happen is going to happen. But over the course of a season, like in basketball, I'm hitting 62% NBA and college combined. I think our picks on Bang the Book are up there pretty well too, for the Big East and the Big Ten. So that's what matters to me. My focus is always at the end of the season. How are we doing overall? Like tonight is only one day of 365 days, as we discussed earlier. But anyway.
Well, and as we look at the Big Ten here for this weekend, 7 games coming up, 5 of them on Saturday. Purdue and Ohio State, pretty interesting game. Illinois at Rutgers, also very interesting. Maryland at a Michigan State team that managed to beat Illinois the other night, but it wasn't exactly pretty. Wisconsin, Nebraska, Northwestern, Penn State. Those are your 5 for Saturday. Iowa, Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan coming up here on Sunday. Any of those games on your radar for this weekend in the Big Ten?
Yeah, a lot of them are going to be, Adam. Which one should we start with here?
Whichever one you want.
Let's see. Let's take a look at Purdue and Ohio State. Now, the Big Ten, as I've said repeatedly, and I think everybody agrees, is by far the best conference this year. The interesting thing is that they've had several teams ranked this year that are not ranked now. One of them being the preseason number 1 Michigan State Spartans. Another one is the Ohio State Buckeyes, who were ranked as high as number 2 the week of December 23rd, and now are not ranked either. And it's been 4 weeks since they've been ranked. However, when I look at my composite statistics based on the team, guess who the top 2 teams are? Michigan State, Ohio State. Followed by Maryland, Penn State, Illinois, Rutgers, Purdue. So looking at these, the line for the Purdue-Ohio State game, which I believe is at Ohio State, right, Adam?
Yes.
I'm looking at that being Ohio State by 7. Maybe more. But I'm willing to bet that you'll see the public come in on Purdue because the sentiment on the Buckeyes right now is horrible because why would you want to bet a team that was ranked 2nd and not even ranked now? But here I think we're getting it's still the same players. It's still the same talent. And I just think that Ohio State and Michigan State are going to make runs here down the stretch to at least salvage the season.
That's an interesting point, especially because, I think that at this point in time, that Ohio State line is probably going to be a little bit lower than what you make it, probably in that 4.5 type of range. So looks like Ohio State may be a play here this weekend for you. And, it is interesting as well to hear that you've got, Michigan State and Ohio State up there as the top teams in the Big Ten because, a lot of people I've heard love Illinois. They really like that Illinois defense. We'll see what they do against Rutgers and what's probably going to be a very slow-paced game here over the weekend. What about that Illinois-Rutgers game? You got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, Illinois is the pick. I'm not sold on Rutgers at all. There was another piece I read out of the Wall Street Journal about Rutgers being good and real good. I think was the title of the article, and I completely didn't see I saw the points the guy was making. I like reading his stuff, but I didn't agree with it. Rutgers has a team that are they're rough. They're physical players. They play like more of a, how should I call it, a street version of pickup ball that you and I used to do back in our day. So there's been games where there's no flow to it. It's very disjointed. But it has worked to this point. But when they've played against teams like an Illinois defense is when they really struggle because when they're not in a flow, their weaknesses are exposed and exacerbated and they lose those games. So with Illinois, their defense, their offense here, I'm looking at the numbers now. Their offense is significantly better than Rutgers overall to this point, and this is weighted, for the most recent games mean the most. And I think a lot of times Rutgers defense gets more credit than it deserves because they play a slower pace as compared to like an Iowa or even a Penn State for that matter. So I will like Illinois in this matchup.
All right, so let's transition over to the Big East here. We'll take a look at that conference. And, again, obviously a very, very strong conference to say the least. We got 3 games coming up here on Saturday. We got another one featuring a Big East team on Sunday. Villanova steps out of conference play to play the last game of its Big Five rivalry series against Temple. I'm sure you'll have some thoughts on that one for Sunday. But as we look at the Big East here, just overall, are you surprised with how things have kind of gone here this past week?
I have, Adam. I've been kind of shocked, actually, because Villanova had their chance to be tied with Seton Hall right now. Seton Hall has had 2 losses here recently, and they lost against Creighton last night. Was one of our picks in the article for the Big East article on Bang the Book. I really wasn't sold on that game. In fact, I put up a tweet late in the day to cut the bet in half because of a trend situation that put Creighton in a 2-10 situation. I guess I panicked. I tried to. You want to give the best information possible, and if I get nervous or not nervous, if I get concerned over some of the data that comes out after you write something, then I kind of feel a responsibility to keep people posted on it too. So the situation in the Big East has now become one that who's going to win this thing? Seton Hall still has control of the regular season title, but when you get in the tournament, this is going to be like a free-for-all. You can name at least 6 teams of the 10 that have a legitimate chance to pull it off. They have 4 teams that are ranked in the top 25. They're the 3rd toughest conference in the nation on my stuff. Second is the Big 12. But from top to bottom, only DePaul is not a good team. So again, every single game is not a guaranteed win.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, especially with what we saw there from Seton Hall in Wednesday's game. We thought that was a difficult spot for them. Coming off of beating Villanova on the road for the first time in, 26 years, I think it was. Creighton, we know that there are worries about Creighton in road games. We've talked about that before here on our segments because they're such a jump shot-oriented offensive team. And they kind of got Seton Hall out of their element a little bit. That game played to 76 possessions. Seton Hall doesn't want to play games in the 80s against anybody. I know they've got Miles Powell, and if you're going to play a shootout, you don't mind having the best player on the floor. But giving up 87 points there to Creighton in what was a pretty difficult spot, I'm not going to say that this is a must-win for them on Saturday against Providence, but I think they do need to bounce back. I think it would be very important for them to get that game, maybe get that lead back to 3 games here in conference play, because that loss to Creighton, where you get some bad habits, you kind of develop some things, that's something that can kind of fester a little bit, especially when you've got several tough games left in conference play.
Yeah, that's a great point. And going to Providence is not a party for anybody. I don't think any of the teams want to play there because Providence is that type of team that can bite you in the butt. And if you're not playing at your top level, you're going to be fighting tooth and nail just to get away with the win. And I like your point on Seton Hall because I think the weakness is that the offense is driven through Miles Powell. If he scores 22 or more, they have a great chance of winning. But the supporting cast of Quincy McKnight, Jared Roden, of course there's others here, Romaro Gill, if they improve their game and contribute more to the scoring and take the pressure off of or the emphasis off of Powell, they're going to be much, much better for it. But to your point, that's exactly what happened in the Seton Hall loss, is they got Powell out of his element a little bit, and it transcended through the team, and they didn't respond. So now you have a blueprint on how to beat Seton Hall.
One last thing I want to ask you about here with regards to the Big East. And like I said, this game coming up here on Sunday, not a Big East game. It is Villanova taking on Temple, but the conclusion of that Big Five rivalry series here in the Philadelphia area, and obviously that's something you're well-versed in, being in that part of the country. What do you think here about a game like this where Villanova, playing all these tough Big East games, they typically roll through Temple? I mean, this hasn't been all that competitive of a head-to-head rivalry the last several years, but very interesting and very difficult type of spot for Villanova.
Yeah, it's a great point. And for basketball purists out there or just basketball fans, a lot of these games are played at an arena called the Palestra, and it's one of the most it's like being at Fenway Park in Boston by comparison. And it should be on your bucket list if you're ever in the Philadelphia area to try to go see one of those games. And of the Big Five, it doesn't matter if it's LaSalle against St. Joe's or Villanova and Temple has kind of been the marquee matchup over the years. But to your point, Villanova's dominated all of them. But it's just a tremendous environment to see a basketball game at the college level. But in this game, I think Villanova will win easily. And I haven't looked at the numbers yet off my models, but I wouldn't be surprised if it would be a pretty big play, possibly a 10-star. Because if any coach in the nation is better prepared in the month of February, other than Jay Wright, I don't know who it is. So I expect them to treat this game as a very important one. Not one that, it doesn't really matter. It's out of conference. It does matter. And their goal is not just to win the Big East, it's to win the whole thing.
John Ryan, professional handicapper whose work you can find over at BangTheBook.com with some NBA market buy and sell, and then also extended week-long looks at the Big East and the Big Ten. You can follow John on Twitter at John Ryan Sports and the number 1. John, what are people going to find on your Twitter page, man?
Oh, all kinds of stuff, Adam. I put up team trends for specific games every day. You'll have some free betting systems that hit 65% and sometimes higher that I think are worthwhile. And then you have an opportunity to subscribe to the premium plays, which I'm able to get pretty cheaply because it's on Twitter. Last week, I wanted to thank everyone who signed up for the 5-day free trial, and we'll have to try that again sometime in the future. And the reason I'm not doing it this week is because there was such a great response that I truly didn't have a way of organizing all of the admin work with emails and names, and it just became a pretty fun task to do. Fun being that I was in demand there for a little bit. So I think for the week or the 5 days, I think we did make a bit of a profit. Obviously, the 10-star and the Sixers was the feature play of the 5 days. But I really thank people for giving it a shot and a test drive, and it does mean a lot to me.
Well, definitely make sure you follow John on Twitter at John Ryan Sports and the number 1, and check out his work over at BangTheBook.com. John, always a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll talk to you again next week.
My pleasure, Adam. Take care.